Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Baked Alaska. That's right, don't believe everything you hear in the lamestream media about this gorgeous dessert being hard to make. It's not. It's super easy. And is it so simple that a certain former governor of Alaska could make it? Oh, you betcha. So despite its fancy looks, this is really super basic and requires almost no cooking. Okay, so let's get started, and first up we have to mold some ice cream. And I'm just going to use a couple soup cups, but this technique is literally going to work with any shape or size container. And one tip, put these in the freezer for about a half hour before you make this, and that'll help prevent the ice cream from melting while we're working with it during this step. And then what we'll do is we'll line the mold with some plastic and begin scooping in some ice cream. So first up, I'm going to put in a couple scoops of raspberry ice cream, and we want to make sure we're pressing down firmly. And once whatever we're using for our first flavor of ice cream is in, we'll take our scoop and make a nice well in the middle, into which we will put our second ice cream, in my case, some French vanilla. And obviously, you can use any ice cream flavors you want here. You could just do one flavor, you could do 3 flavors. But using more than one flavor definitely makes for a more impressive presentation. And then once that's been done, we can move on to the last component, of the inside of this at least, which would be the cake layer. And for this, I'm just using some high-quality, store-bought chocolate sponge cake. And unless you have a lot of free time on your hands, don't make homemade cake for this. You bake a homemade cake when you want to eat homemade cake, not when you want to eat baked Alaska. So I'm using store-bought, and all we need to do is cut a thick slice, and then we'll cut or stamp out a round piece that will fit our cup. And as you can see, my cake wasn't quite wide enough, but that's really not going to matter because we're going to cover everything with our Italian meringue. And once we've cut our cake to fit, we'll press that down firmly on top of our ice cream. And as you can see, I'm pressing down and want to make sure everything's nice and compact in there. And we'll wrap those up. And at this point, we're going to transfer those into the freezer until they are frozen solid. All right, at least a few hours. Overnight's even better. All right, so really the only way to screw this up is to not freeze that stuff solid enough before you do the meringue. So you're going to have to decide how long to leave that in the freezer. You're the Sarah Palin of not failing. So make sure it's frozen solid. But once it is, we can move on to the last step, which is our Italian meringue. So in the bowl of my stand mixer, I have 2 egg whites, to which we're going to add a squeeze of lemon juice. The acid in the juice is going to help stabilize these whites. And what we'll do is we'll use the whisk attachment on our mixer, and we will beat these egg whites to the soft peak stage, at which point we will introduce our sugar. So I want you to stop right at this point. All right, we don't have stiff peaks. We have very soft, very fuzzy, very floppy peaks. And at this point, if we were making just a regular meringue, we would just sprinkle in the sugar and beat it some more. But for an Italian meringue, we're actually going to add a very hot sugar syrup. So into a little saucepan, we're going to add some granulated sugar and a splash of water. And we will bring that over to the stove and put it on medium-high heat. And of course, that sugar is going to dissolve and it's going to start to simmer. And what we need to do is cook this to exactly 240 degrees Fahrenheit. Please do not accidentally cook this to 240 degrees Celsius. That's going to be a little too far. All right, so make sure you have a candy thermometer or one of these probe thermometers. And a lot of people like to leave the heat on medium-high to high for this. I don't. Once mine starts boiling, I like to back the heat down to medium or even medium-low so this goes kind of slow, because it can shoot right past that target temperature super quick. Oh, and one other thing. You see those grains of sugar stuck to the sides of the pot? You're actually supposed to take a wet paintbrush and kind of brush those down back into the mixture. But I don't. I can't be bothered. And you know what? It's never caused a problem. But anyway, like I said, we're going to cook this to 240 degrees, at which point we're going to remove it from the stove. We'll turn our mixer back on, and while it's whipping, we will carefully and slowly pour that sugar syrup in a thin but steady stream. So if you look straight across to the back of the bowl, you can see that being poured in. And I try to aim for right where the meringue meets the bowl. Okay, right on that edge. And because that stuff is so hot, it's going to actually cook those egg whites, which creates a very stable, very easy to work with meringue. And don't be alarmed, but you will actually notice steam coming out of the bowl. Totally normal. And if you feel the side with your hand, it's going to be very hot. And then all we need to do here is continue mixing on high speed until the mixture cools down and we have some very, very stiff peaks. And I mean stiff. So I'm filling the bowl here, and it's gone from very hot to just barely warm. So I'm going to turn that off and take a look. And this is exactly what you want. Very beautiful, very creamy, but very, very stiff peaks. So that's perfect. Look at that. Now that's a stiff peak. You could put an eye out with that. And assuming our ice cream and cake molds are now completely frozen, we can move on to final production. So we'll unwrap our ice cream, we will invert that on a plate, and we will cover it in some decorative fashion with our meringue. And I decided to do 2 for you. So this first one will be a little fancier. So I'm going to pipe around the bottom, and then we'll pipe straight up from the bottom to the top. And as you can see, because we're using that Italian meringue, This stuff is really going to hold those sharp lines, which as you'll see is kind of a big deal when we brown this. And once you've completed that, you could just leave the top rough like that. But since this was the fancy one, I decided to take a little off the top, flatten it out a little bit, so I could pipe some really nice rosettes on the top. All right, so that was fancy design number 1. And then for this second one, if you want, you can go a lot simpler and just cover it all over with little rosettes, which while not as intricate, still looks amazing. In fact, the takeaway here is not to worry too much about your design. Once this is brown, no matter what you've done, is going to look amazing, okay? And once we've covered that with whatever design we're doing, the last step is to brown the outside. And probably the easiest way is a blowtorch. Although on the blog, I will give you instructions to use a hot oven instead. And you want to use a light touch here. All right, we really just want to brown the ridges so we have that beautiful contrast between the dark brown and that bright white underneath. So we will go around, we'll brown that meringue. And once you're happy with how it looks, which for me was right here, your baked Alaska is done and ready to eat. I mean, come on, how gorgeous is that? And we hardly did any work. So let's go ahead and cut into this so we can see what we have. And as beautiful as the outside was, the inside's every bit as pretty. And you can see here why you want to use more than one flavor of ice cream. I think those multiple layers really add to this. And then traditionally at this point, I would just start eating, but I want to show you one amazing trick / discovery. If you don't have a blowtorch and don't want to heat your oven up to 500 just to use it for a couple minutes, you can actually use a windproof lighter to do this. Oh yeah, there's no camera tricks here. I browned this entire baked Alaska using a cheap windproof lighter. In fact, if we're being honest, this actually did a better job and was easier to control than the blowtorch. So there you go, very cheap, very cool alternative. So I browned up my fancy one. And then speaking of fancy, if you want, you can always serve this flambe style. This was just a little bit of brandy that I warmed up, ignited, and spooned over. And had I thought to close the blinds, that would have looked incredible. And besides the flames, that liquor is actually going to soak into the cake as it sits on the plate. So it's your classic win-win. But anyway, let me cut into this one so I actually can take the official bite or two. And it should come as a shock to no one that cake, ice cream, and Italian meringue are really good together. And obviously, any combination of cake or ice cream flavors will work. Sky's the limit, up to you. So you really can tailor this to your tastes. So whether you're making this for some special occasion like Valentine's Day, or you just want an easy make-ahead dessert for a weeknight dinner, I really do hope you give this Baked Alaska technique a try soon. Okay? So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy